I would like to relate a small experience I had as a schoolboy. When I used to travel in the train, it was a common experience that children were impatient when the train stopped at a station. And some of the children would try to push the train by pushing at the wall of the compartment from inside. Of course, they couldn't do anything. We all know that from inside something, we cannot push it ourselves. Now, why am I relating this? Because from the things we have spoken about the Master earlier, we have seen that he does things to the universe from within its own environment. No, that is something which normally we should not be able to do. But when we examine this question, we find that there are two ways in which we act. Physical movement needs force from outside on the object to be moved, but forces of life, of growth, of evolution come from within. That is why you cannot make a seed grow from outside, it has to grow from inside itself. So also a chicken from an egg. We are familiar with this sort of natural growth of things. That is one reason why in Sahaj Marg, my master never recommended any use of any external application of practices, efforts, and many of the things not recommended we know, such as ritualistic, religious practices, and even yogic practices like Hatha Yoga, for instance. Because his teaching came out of a profound understanding of the principles of life, that true well-being, true growth, true evolution must come and can come only from inside. And that was how he worked. Therefore, it was necessary for him to put himself inside our hearts. And this he achieved in the most remarkable way, which no surgeon can possibly attempt. It is one of the well-known ideas of people of the movement of the fourth dimension, for instance, that you cannot introduce anything into a closed object without opening it. So normally we should have our hearts cut open and the seed put into it. But he is able to do it from a different dimension altogether. And therefore this miraculous ability that he had to introduce himself into our hearts without breaking our hearts. I mean literally. Because normally in the human level of association, intercourse, there seems to be a great deal of breaking of hearts where love is involved. But his was the only love that I have known which never broke a heart, both literally and in other ways, figuratively, romantically, allegorically, in all ways. Which leads me to conclude that the only real way of love which can be love without breaking another heart is the spiritual love. So until we remain mere human beings and we act at the mere human level of love, we are more or less destined to fail. And other conclusion, one more conclusion is that if we have to act in ways initiative of our evolution and in ways which can contribute to our evolution, our own practices must also be internalized. That is, they must be from within ourselves. External aids may suffice for the nonce, for the time being, but they cannot help us all along. You know, like a man who has temporarily fallen, you can help him by holding his hand. But one who loses the capacity to walk, you cannot by any means help him. It applies to all other helps, all other forms of help. One individual can help another individual in any field of activity only if there is some remnant of that activity still present in the person who needs the help. One who has lost the ability to think, you cannot do anything with him. Incidentally, this is one reason why Master did not permit our working with mentally unsound persons. Because though the mind is there, though the brain is there, the power to think has gone and they cannot be helped. So it is necessary to rectify the process of thought itself from within before you can help from outside. Therefore, I would suggest that what Master does for us in any field is to carry out this process of rectification from within ourselves, from within us recipients, and then strengthening the forces of life so that we are able to reach a level where we can then operate for ourselves. So correction, normalization, and then independent movement. These would appear to be three stages in our activity. And he does all this from inside. Now, these are things difficult to understand because in our world, we are used to rectifying things from outside. If it is mechanical things, take a screwdriver, open up the thing, correct it and close it up again. Even the human body is handled in that way, unfortunately. Today, anything can be cut open and stuffed with something else and closed up again, sewn up as they call it in surgical terms. In fact, in some societies, in slang, when some job is completed, when the man reports to his boss, he says, "I've got it all sewn up, boss." So this shows the grossest physical approach to things. And it also shows the highest human arrogance, that we can handle anything from outside and correct it. And when we fail, we are miserable. But unfortunately, we seem to lack the basic understanding that what we cannot do from the outside, we should try from within. And I would like to extend this line of reasoning to education itself. Because education, if it is understood as a mere stuffing of facts from outside into the poor head of a poor recipient, may at best achieve something like a computer memory, at best. Often it achieves nothing more than remembrance of a few facts, which we are unable to connect together for our understanding, and which we are therefore unable to use when we need them. You know, we have a saying in my Tamil language that when you see a dog, you don't have a stone to chase it away with, and when you have a stone, there is no dog. So this is the situation that faces most of us. And this is not a small matter, you see. When I am hungry, I have no food. People who are surrounded by food are too sick to eat. People who want to work have no work. Where there's a lot of work, there's nobody to do it. And most tragically, we have love in the heart, but nobody to love. So you see, I am giving you these, rather childish examples to show to you that even the coming together of two things is the most difficult thing in nature. That a seed should fall in the right place where conditions exist for it to germinate is one of the miracles of nature, for instance. Nature anticipates this enormous difficulty and provides millions of seeds. Otherwise, there would have been no survival at all of life. Imagine one tree having one seed and that seed being rotten or eaten up by something. In no time at all, such a species would cease to exist. And you have the famous parable of the sower in the Christian tradition, about how the sower of the seed went forth and sowed his seeds, and some fell on rocks and stony ground and were eaten by the birds. Some fell among brambles and thorn and were choked to death, and a few fell on fertile soil and germinated. The sower's business seems to have been over with that, but farmers and agriculturists know that that is not enough. After the seed germinates, there are so many problems until it becomes a tree. So life is something which struggles to express itself. It has to struggle to come into existence first. And how enormously powerful this struggle for life, this struggle for existence is, I understood when I read that seeds taken from the tombs of pharaohs who were dead 5,000 years ago could yet germinate when they were sown again. So this proves two things to us, that life is extremely fragile and can be destroyed most senselessly without anybody knowing about it. At the same time, it has such an enormous inner potency for existence that it can span practically aeons of time. So it depends on us in which way we permit that life to act. Now, this is what the Master does for us. Many people said he was generous. He was very generous. He was loving. He was kind. All these things. Of course, nobody will deny these things. But if we examined it more deeply, we find his generosity was that of the sower who had a bag full of seeds and went about sowing it without distinction of where the seeds fell. And one difference between him and the ordinary sower is that he had an infinite bag which never became empty. So he could receive all of us without distinction, without examination, without even thinking whether we are fit to receive his grace or not. And why did he do this? Well, at the human level, I suppose it was kindness and love. But I am not prepared to accept that that was all. He was charged with the responsibility of raising the next crop, even if it was only one single plant which he represented himself. And live or die, as we say, he had to achieve this. Even if it meant that he had to sow millions of seeds over tens of years. So in that sense, his love, his generosity were, to me, see, this is my personal view of the whole thing, a struggle for self-perpetuation. And what was his self? It was the self of a master who was prepared to sacrifice everything he had to see that the line of masters continues unbroken. So that is my inference. Perhaps I am wrong, perhaps I am right, I don't know. Of course, his minimum expectation was that there should be at least one. What did his generosity mean in real terms? It meant that while he needed one, he was prepared to accept millions of us, to make each one of us like himself, if that was possible. Now in nature this is possible, because when a seed germinates, it has to be like the parent tree. There is no question of it. Every botanist, every biologist knows this. Well, it's a grace of God that even human beings only produce human beings, at least in form. But the further propagation of the human being as a human being seems to be much more difficult, because nature, having endowed us with the intellect and the will, has bestowed upon us, I think rather wrongly, rather unwisely, a freedom to do with ourselves as we will. And it is a well-known fact, we have to experiment a great deal with ourselves, our thoughts, our actions, before we become really capable of handling our freedom in the right way. That was one of the lessons of my master, that freedom is not something to be enjoyed, but something to be used. I think it's a tragedy of human understanding that freedom is to be enjoyed. I don't know how this stupid idea of freedom ever came into the human mind, because it is the most destructive thought that ever arose in the human mentality. And if you see drunkards, drug addicts, rapists all around you, it is because of this misuse of the idea of freedom leading to the misuse of the act of freedom itself. And what are the consequences of such misuse of our freedom? Loss of freedom, because even a hospital means loss of freedom. We may not be behind bars. Those psychopaths, schizophrenics, they may also find themselves behind bars, and imagine it is not a jail. But the worst prisons are the prisons of our conscience. When a man is forced to go into himself and examine himself and is unable to come out of himself, which is what produces the ultimate horror. See, paranoia, things like that, and where you cannot wake the man up and bring him out of that inner reality into which he has sort of regressed totally. And which is so frightening, because there he sees himself as he is, and he is afraid of bringing it out. So it is the ultimate fear of the self and its degradation. All this was created by a false understanding of freedom. I don't think any rational person could possibly controvert this idea. And this is what my master taught, that dear friends, dear brothers and sisters, don't have wrong ideas of freedom. Freedom is given to you to achieve yet greater levels of freedom by right use of freedom. It applies to education. Education gives us a mental freedom which we would never know had we not been educated. The same thing applies to technology, science, everything. All these freedoms that we acquire by the application of human intelligence to our environment compel us to exercise the greatest restraint in the use of those freedoms to provide for a common evolution of all of us. I must emphasize common evolution of all of us, because every rich man, every educated man will claim, yes, but I am using it for my evolution. I had 100 francs, I started a small business, I own 10 factories and millions of dollars in Swiss accounts. Such a person may think he has evolved by looking at his bank account. His bank account has evolved, but he has not evolved. I mean, that's a simple fact. Rich people are not necessarily good people even. And almost never are they evolved people. Not because they are rich, though the Christian tradition does say that even a camel can pass through the eye of a needle, but a rich man shall never cross the doors of heaven. Incidentally, there's a very humorous story told to me once by Master on this particular subject. An ordinary man like all of us here, he died and went to the gate of heaven. And the angel on duty made him wait, saying that his records had to be checked before he could be admitted. He had been standing there for 10, 12 hours, very tired, very disappointed, and in some way quite, disenchanted with the whole thing. Because he assumed that once you get to heaven, everything will be hoity-toity, you see. Everything will be hoity-toity, that's a British expression, which means everything will be nice. And here he was standing for 12 hours, 14 hours, and nothing seems to be happening. He kept reminding the angel on duty, but he didn't get any action out of him. After he had been there nearly a whole day, another soul came. Immediately there was a frantic exchange between the angel on duty and some inner sanctum. There was hurried motion everywhere, the gates were thrown open, a red carpet was spread, And the heavenly equivalent of a car with a chauffeur came and drove the soul to God. And drove him inside. This poor fellow who was waiting asked the angel, who was that guy who just went in? So he said, well, he is one of the richest and most powerful men on earth who just died. Then this fellow said, how come you sent him in, but I'm still waiting here, 24 hours have gone. The angel said, look, that's not my business. You better ask the boss inside when you get there. So eventually this poor soul reached the audience chamber of God. And as soon as he reached there, he said, God, I have a question to ask. God smiled and said, yes, my son, what is your question? He said, well, look, I've been waiting here 24 hours. I don't want to complain. But how come this rich guy got in so fast? I didn't think there would be this nepotism and corruption in heaven too. So God smiled and said, my son, you need to have a great deal of understanding in these matters. He said, yes, God, I am prepared to do it if you will kindly explain how this happens here. So then God said, my son, people like you come to me in millions every day, but a soul like that comes once in millions of years. Don't you think he deserves some special reception? So this was the answer of God. So it's a story told to me by Master himself. Now I was wondering why this should be so. Why the very rich cannot reach. Why the very intelligent don't seem to reach there so easily. And then I found that like any instrument which we possess, the first tendency is to use it for our own welfare. We don't think of others. I have money, I spend it for myself. I have a car, I go myself where I want. Whereas the one who has nothing is forced to serve. That is the secret. That through service, having nothing at our disposal, we can become that which no one can become when he has everything at his disposal. So it is service of the others that make us evolve. Very simple to understand. And the truth emphasized by all religions. Serve others. This has always been the call of spirituality, religion. And who does this most capably? A master who has no instruments, no wealth, no teaching, no riches, no education, power even, but yet has that infinite capacity of service, which gives him the ability, it can be called even unnatural ability, of penetrating into the heart of things. And that is what we call understanding too. Because even in language we say that is the heart of the matter. So how is it that a master is able to understand us so easily without knowing us, without asking questions of us, without studying our biodata? It is because in one glance he goes right into our hearts and sees what we are. This is why I have found most people were afraid of sitting before my master when they were new to him. Because intuitively they understood that before him all was open. There could be no secrets before such a person. And foolishly, childishly, many avoided being in his presence, thinking that if there is a wall between them, he could not see them. See, isn't it foolish to imagine that one who can penetrate through our rib cage and our flesh and blood and go into the heart can be stopped by a mere wall or by mere walls? But it was not merely foolishness. It was an unwillingness to reveal to him our uncleanness, our degradation, degradation. And how did I discover this? Because Master used to go to such persons himself under one pretext or the other, and by some gesture, by a glance, he could almost always bring them back with him. In a sense, he was assuring them, don't be afraid of me, don't be shy of yourself, don't be afraid of revealing yourself. Not because I know everything, but because you are not very really different from the others. It's only a difference of degree, you see. He has stolen 10 rupees, you have stolen 1 million, that's all. You see. Like saying, she has broken 2 hearts, you have broken 7. So it was a compassion born in him out of a profound understanding of the sameness of human nature. And I think I told a story somewhere about Dr. Vardachari, perhaps in Four-Off, about a young man who was weeping and miserable and fell at Vardachari's feet. And when he asked him, why are you weeping so much? He said, sir, help me, I am a great sinner. Vardachari was profoundly annoyed. He asked this young fellow, what sin have you committed? A bottle of wine, a woman? Come back to me when you have done something original. Which fool has not done these things? This was his answer. I mean, such an answer could not come unless you have the profoundest meaning of what human life is. And as my master once explained to me when I told him the story of Dr. Vardachari and that boy, he said there is a greater sin which perhaps he did not realize, and that is to be conscious of one's sin. We should never imagine or think about what we have done. Things of the past are in the past, they cannot be changed by any means. But from this moment you can change yourself. For that every assistance is available, every power is available. And what is the higher sin even than that? It is to deny this opportunity for self-correction and go on the path of evolution and seek to remain as we are from foolish ideas, animalistic ideas of pleasure, enjoyment, freedom, things like that. So Master said that is a bigger sin than any sin you can possibly commit with your body. Now I think it is by an inner feeling of this truth, an inner realization of this truth, that most people who come to spirituality come there at all. Why do we come to a Master? It shows an inner discontent with what we are. Otherwise there is, I cannot imagine a possible reason for trying to change yourself. No one will attempt to change himself or herself if they are really happy with themselves and their circumstances. So the seed of change, inner change, comes from discontent with what we are. Discontent, dissatisfaction, disappointment, whatever it be. Unfortunately, human beings try to handle this discontent by further satiation in the pleasures that they are having. By imagining that the pleasure that one bottle of wine could not give could be given by a second bottle, by a third bottle. So stupidly, self-destructively, we indulge in repetitive activities of this sort. It is like some of these streets, dead-end streets, where there's a wall across the street. And like a buffalo, you try to butt your way through it. Pull back, ram your head against it. Pull back, ram your head against it. If at all you achieve anything, it will be a broken head. Therefore, in our love lives, we have broken hearts. Because we try to throw this heart again and again at the same wall of resistance, same wall of hatred, and the poor heart breaks. So whose fault is it? When an animal does it, we say stupid animal. When we do it, we are Europeans, we come from the EC community, we are rich, we are white, we are educated, we are intelligent, and the highest arrogance that our passports can take us anywhere. The American is at the top, of course. Well, it is a joke, but it is a real thing too. I am not saying because Claude might suggest that in India we have the same foolishness. Yes, we have, but we know we are foolish. So in that sense, we are less stupid than our Western brothers and sisters. Because there starts the humility which says, I am not that wise, that intelligent guy that I thought myself to be. And the only thing that I have proved can help by being repeated again and again is begging. Begging at the Master's door. Because there is no refusal. So this secret we have in India and in other Eastern societies, but unfortunately there we beg at human beings' doors, you see, for material food. That being a consequence of poverty. That again is an excuse, you see, that they are forced to beg for their existence. Here we are surrounded by prosperity, by plenty, by high technology. And what do we use it for? More and more electricity generated by more and more atomic power plants, which brings about the possibility of death not only of the Western societies, but unfortunately threatening to export it to the East also. So we are faced with this rather fascinating but ununderstandable fact that the highest education, the highest technology has only created self-destructive tendencies here. And these tendencies have to be corrected. And therefore, all the more need for yogic pursuits here in the West. That is why my Master used to emphasize that in a society where these powers of the mind, of science, of technology are available, he said, don't look down on such societies because for the moment they are morally aberrated. I was surprised. I said, Babuji, you don't think they are morally degraded? He said, yes, of course, but it's a temporary thing. He said, if that is corrected, if their mental tendencies are corrected, that is where civilization will flower afresh. Because they have all the possibilities hidden within themselves, covered over by the slime and filth of their own stupidities. And that by Lalaji's grace, I can easily clear away. So you see, there is a double-pronged feature in all these things, like in everything. There is a plus, there is a minus. We have not the plus at all in the East. We are a negative society. We are afraid of sins. Not because of sinning, because somehow sinning seems to be very pleasant, but because of the consequences of sinning. So we have lost the ability to do anything fresh, try anything. That is, Eastern societies lack initiative. No, this is a defeatist attitude to life. And one great disease in the East, especially in my land, is this doctrine of karma. So we too have the potential, you see. We have all the soul power, all the aspiration. We are too afraid to try anything because we may be wrong. Here also you have everything, but you are prepared to try every wrong thing to prove that it is wrong. before you will accept it the right. Because in some way doing the right seems to be too childish. So we both suffer, but because of different tendencies. This answers why generally masters have been born in the East and why generally they have been more successful in the West. Because the steam power is there, the road to evolution is here. This is some sort of a very generalized analysis of the picture, but it is very true because master often told me, he was asked always by several people, how is it that the people of the West, so morally corrupt, degraded, are so successful in everything they do? Master said the answer is very simple. Their mind is capable of working in one direction, whether it is research or skirt chasing. This is the secret, you see. Whereas the Eastern mind, they always divided into multiple channels, and religion has been its greatest enemy in the East. Because they have gods for everything. Gods of love, gods of wealth, gods of education, gods for science, technology, grass, mangoes, anything. So the mind is divided in multiple channels. It becomes powerless, listless. So what has to be done is for the East to bring its mind together into one channel. And what is necessary in the West is to use the already canalized the mind in the right way. Both will succeed. And both are easy. All that the East has to do is to forget the other channels and stick to one. And after all, this is simple, you see. Because every man who owns a television set knows that it may have 32 channels, but you can use only one at a time. So that is the Western wisdom. Do one thing at a time and do it well. Therefore, they are successful in their sins and in their virtues. Unfortunately, my Eastern brothers and sisters with multiple mental channels are successful neither in their sins nor in their virtues. So this is the tragic circumstance facing society, human society, all over the world. So my master's message to the West was and is, think of the goal and go towards it. So in that sense, dear brothers and sisters, our problem here is much easier and capable of faster solution. And it is to this opportunity that we must rise. Not to satisfy some master sitting in Shahjahanpur, but to fulfill our responsibilities and duties to ourselves. Because, it is futile to think of society, ecology and all this nonsense. Unless the individual human mind is changed and every human being becomes capable of recognizing where his welfare lies, what is our goal, what are our duties and responsibilities, all that governments are trying to do to rectify the present ecological disaster, AIDS, things like that, they can only be cosmetic changes, nothing more than that. So if we want to change our society, the ancient wisdom says what it has always said, change yourself. Thank you.